You know, we tend to think of the U.S. Constitution as this almost sacred document. But what if I told you it was actually born from one of the most intense, high-stakes political fights in American history? A battle that turned friends into rivals and really defined the nation's deepest tension, the clash between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists.
So when the Constitution was first drafted, you might think everybody just stood up and applauded. Nope, not even close. For a whole lot of people, it looked like a dangerous power grab. Honestly, its approval was so up in the air that the entire American experiment was hanging by a thread.
Okay, let's set the scene a little. The revolution is over, America won, but the country is kind of falling apart under the super weak Articles of Confederation. So, to fix things, a new constitution is put on the table, one that creates a much, much stronger national government. But instead of uniting the founders, this idea lit a political firestorm, splitting them right down the middle.
And this gets us to our first big idea here. This wasn't just some political squabble over taxes or something. This was a deep, profound debate that was going to define the very soul of this new nation. And man, Alexander Hamilton just nailed the stakes here. He basically said, listen up, the whole world is watching. Can we actually build a good government based on thoughtful reflection and choice? Or are we all just doomed to have our governments decided by accident and force, like war or a king's whim? The pressure was absolutely immense.
All right, so in this high-stakes intellectual showdown, two totally different visions for America came to the forefront. Let's meet the two sides. So you've got two teams, basically. On one side, you have the Federalists. They were all about a strong central government. And on the other, the Anti-Federalists. They were passionate that real power should stay with the individual states, closer to the people. Let's dig into who they were.
The Federalists were the guys pushing hard for this new Constitution. And they were the heavyweights. We're talking George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison. Their whole argument was that for the U.S. to even survive, let alone handle big national issues like defense and trade, it needed a much more powerful central government. And their fans? They tended to be merchants, lawyers, people living in cities.
And squaring off against them were the Anti-Federalists. These were fiery figures like Patrick Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death Henry and George Mason. They were absolutely terrified that this new, beefed-up government would be far away, totally out of touch, and would eventually just stamp out people's rights and the power of the states. To them, it looked an awful lot like the British monarchy they'd just fought a war to get away from.
And when you boil it all down, all their disagreements, all their arguments, they came back to one central conflict. It was a fundamental battle over where power should actually live. Should it be with the states or with the national government?
This really was the million-dollar question. For centuries, the conventional wisdom was that republics could only work in small areas, where citizens basically knew their leaders. So could a republic possibly survive across a huge, sprawling territory like the 13 states? Most people thought, no way.
And you can really hear that fear in this quote from an anti-federalist writer who called himself Brutus. He's saying that in a huge nation, your representatives are basically strangers. The government becomes this distant, elite thing, and the public good is sacrificed to 1,000 different special interests.
But then James Madison comes along with this absolutely revolutionary idea. He just flips that old wisdom completely on its head. He argues that a big republic is actually safer for freedom. And why? Because with so many different groups and interests, it becomes almost impossible for any single one of them to form a majority and start stomping on everyone else's rights. It was a brilliant move, turning what everyone saw as a weakness into the system's greatest strength. So there you have it, two totally different visions. For the Anti-Federalists, liberty was local. Power needed to stay close to home, in the states. But for the Federalists, national survival depended on a government that could actually manage national problems, something they were convinced the old Articles of Confederation had completely failed to do.
But you gotta remember, this wasn't just some academic debate about government theory. It was driven by really deep, genuine fears. Fears about rights and what this powerful new government might do to them.
And this was the Anti-Federalist trump card. George Mason pointed out pretty bluntly that the new Constitution had no Bill of Rights, nothing that explicitly protected freedom of speech or religion. So what was to stop this new government from becoming a tyranny? For a lot of people, this was an absolute deal-breaker.
And Madison's comeback here really gets to the heart of how the Federalists saw the world. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. He's saying, look, people aren't perfect, so you need a government strong enough to control them. But then, the real trick? Building a government that could also control itself.
So what was their big solution? Honestly, it was a stroke of genius, the separation of powers. They split the government into 3 branches: legislative, executive, judicial, each with its own job to do. And then they gave each branch the power to put the brakes on the others. The whole point, as Madison famously put it, was to set it up so that ambition must be made to counteract ambition.
Okay, so you have these 2 powerful, competing visions on a total collision course. How did this epic debate finally wrap up? Well, it wasn't with one side crushing the other. It ended with a brilliant and, as it turns out, very lasting compromise.
In the end, you could make a pretty good case that both sides won. The Federalists absolutely got their strong national government when the Constitution was finally ratified. But the Anti-Federalists, their loud, fierce opposition forced the addition of the Bill of Rights. They made sure that individual freedoms would be explicitly protected from that new government's power. It was a huge victory for them.
And this isn't just ancient history, folks. The legacy of this debate is still with us every single day. It basically baked a fundamental tension right into the DNA of American politics, that constant tug-of-war between having a strong national government and protecting state power and our individual rights.
Which leaves us with the exact same question they were wrestling with all those years ago. This balancing act between federal power and individual liberty. It shows up in almost every political debate we have today. So the question for you is, when you look at the world around you, do you think we have that balance right?